Well, hi, everybody, and welcome. You are watching and listening to the Spiritual Exercises. I'm Rachel Amadei, and I am so excited to be here today interviewing a very special guest, someone who I've been friends with for a long time. And we kind of met through a really random situation. That I was doing in music, actually, oddly enough, and then have been able to reconnect over the last few years. And I've enjoyed it so much because she and her husband do incredible work, like literally God's work. So I am excited to be introducing Krista Deyoung to you all. And she is the founder of Girl Above as well as Set Your Mind. She is just months away from having her master's in clinical psychology, specializing in working with families, especially teenagers, because that's a lot of the work that she has done already with her organization Girl Above, which I'm going to have her explain a little bit more about. But Krista, thank you for being here.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
This is so awesome. I've been waiting to interview you for a while. You've been so busy getting your degree and doing all of this work. I know you've probably been like me at times, like 5 a.m. till 11 p.m. and it's just nonstop. Plus, you have a brand
Yes.
new little one.
Yes,
Well, he's not
I do.
so brand new, but he's kind of brand new.
He's 2. It counts. Yeah.
Yeah. And 2, I feel like my kids didn't have the terrible 2s, they had the terrible 3s. I'm not saying that's gonna happen to you at all, but, like, the ages of 2 to 3 were almost just as exhausting as babyhood is what I recall, actually, from that time period, so I know you're
Yeah.
busy. Thanks for doing
Yeah.
this.
Of
This is
course.
great.
Yeah,
This is
this is
great.
awesome.
So, I would love for you to share a little bit more about who you are, your background, your education, your goals, what you're doing right now. Just share with us who you are. Yeah.
Okay, all the things.
Yeah.
So, my name is Krista, like Rachel mentioned, and I actually got into this work of mental health in teens just kind of accidentally, I guess, although the Lord knew. So, I got my undergrad degree in biology. And the plan was to be a nurse, do something like that. And I ended up actually getting my degree in biology and secondary education. So it landed me in an eighth grade classroom, which is the last place I wanted to be. I'm like, I'll never do middle school. They're so
Yeah.
bad. And it turned out to be everything I thought it would be. It was
Mm.
the hardest thing I've ever done. And the students were so naughty, so naughty. And but it was an amazing eye-opening experience because I had a challenging time as a high schooler. I think we all do to a degree. It's not generally like the best
Not
years of
fun.
our lives.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this particular school, I was just noticing really how bad it was. And these were kids who had parents in gangs and in jail. And at that
Mhm.
same time, I was coaching 2 dance teams. So I was with teenagers from like 7 a.m. till sometimes 9 or 10 at night
Mm.
and just learning everything about how they think, what's going on in their world. And there were kind of 3 main themes like, I'm alone, no one will ever understand me, and this will never get better.
Hmm.
So I just developed a heart and an understanding for teenagers. And that opened up this whole journey for me to get into the mental health field. So after I was working at that school, I went to a private Christian school to teach dance. And I noticed that like the affluence had changed, but the core issues were the same that the
Hmm.
kids were dealing with. It just kind of presented itself differently. And in 2015, I launched a nonprofit called Girl Above aimed at teenage girls and kind of combating those 3 main narratives of like, no one will ever understand this. This will never end, and I'm completely alone. And it started off as
Mm.
a blog, and it ended up being a bunch of social media content. We started kind of building a collective of counselors at the time to run classes for parents. Like, okay, what do you do with your teenager when you find out that they're self harming, or when you just
Mm.
can't really communicate well, or you're running into roadblocks relationally? So we did that. And I would say at this point, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of parents.
Mm.
And then I was like, I feel like I'm in this counseling realm somehow. Like, I
Yeah.
just got here. So then I started my graduate work in clinical counseling, and I'll be done with that in just a few weeks, which is amazing. And then Set Your Mind is an organization that I started to cover my future counseling work, and I'll be starting to see clients in the fall.
Mm,
And with that, we are working with schools actually right now to train teachers in the mental health of their students and to build social emotional learning curriculum that actually fits more faith-based values.
mm.
So that's actually the short version of that story. So that's what I've been up to.
That's a lot. That's a
Yeah,
lot. Now, I want you to explain a little bit more the social emotional learning aspect of what you're doing, just because
right,
that is a term that's come up a lot in the last few years. And I know public schools have been implementing their version of social emotional learning for a while now that
right.
includes all sorts of ideas,
Yeah.
religious ideas. I think they're religious ideas. What when you say that, what are you hoping that faith-based schools are going to do, or um, how is yours different than what public schools have been implementing?
Yes. Well, there are so many different social emotional curriculums out there. And the reason that they're called that is to teach social skills and, emotional learning. What are your
Mhm,
feelings and how do you engage with others? I think it's been kind of hijacked recently, but the way that this would be different is to kind of focus back on the social and emotional wellness of the child. So having them understand their feelings. What does it look like to set boundaries? Um, Talking about virtue and honor and how you bring those things into actual practice in your life and kind of stuff like that, even integrating the faith piece. Like you think about, let's say, the fruit of the Spirit. It's like something most kids who are raised in the church are familiar with, but then it's like, how do you actually live
mm,
that out? And how can you
mhm,
integrate that into the way you show up socially with others, with your teachers, with yourself, with your parents? And
mhm.
then the emotions piece is so huge. And I wish that schools didn't even have to teach this, honestly. Like a lot of it should be taught in the home. But I would say the key of how it's different is to pull out a lot of the just the politically aimed stuff that is completely irrelevant. That doesn't mean that you don't teach kids how to engage with people who are different than
Mhm.
them, all of that. It's just not with the same agenda, if you know what I
Right.
mean. Yeah,
Yes, and I think what's interesting about faith-based schools is they have a different type of opportunity for this kind of learning because it's biblically based. So if you go to a Christian school, you have Bible class, which kids at public school are not getting.
right,
And you have these opportunities to learn things through a biblical worldview that I think benefit those kids. I remember learning in Bible class virtues, right? And all sorts of applications and memorizing Bible verses that would help me apply those things in my daily life, and I can recall that and I can say it and I can use it and those sorts of tools. And it makes a lot of sense that in a faith-based education, you would be able to integrate, well, basically what the Bible has to say about what do we do with our feelings and how do we treat other
right,
people and how do we overcome evil with good in ourselves? And
right.
that's something that, we should see as a I think we could see as a benefit for parents sending their kids to a private education, because the last thing that we want is for our private schools to turn into the same social environment as our public schools, and I feel very strongly that a lot of private schools have the same social environment as public schools do,
Yeah,
sadly.
yeah. Largely they
Yeah.
do.
Largely, they do. I went to one. I went to a high
Mhm.
school where there were crazy things happening in the locker room, and there were unbelievable things happening socially, and everybody just pretended that wasn't happening, but it was. And so, I think parents who want to pull their kids out of public school, not just because of the bad curriculum or the bad theology happening at public school, but they also wanna know that the kids there and the parents there are on the same page with morals and virtues and all of those things. So I think that's excellent. I love hearing that.
Right.
Yeah.
When we have to remember too, with just because the school is a Christian school, it's still full of teenagers.
Mhm.
And just saying like, "Oh, I'm raised in a Christian family," that means nothing in terms of how they're gonna show up in the world if they have not made their faith their own or have not kind of bought in to what it looks like to live a virtuous life. And so it in a lot of ways it surprises me, but it doesn't, because it's like there's a bunch of 15 to 17-year-old kids there,
Yeah.
and they're a mess. And we forget how much teaching and instruction teenagers need. Like, they are naturally wayward. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think we kind of I don't totally remember how I was during those years, but I remember enough to know, yes, I was also naturally wayward and also
Yes.
questioning and I would say too incredibly self-destructive. So, if you're not in the right friend group, if you're not getting the right support, what I noticed at least in my teen life and my friends' experience and then what I seem to be seeing of teenagers today, even teens of good Christian families, they're self-destructive. Like, they get a little of that depression, they get a little of those bad internal, messages that you're talking about, and they can really point it in the wrong direction and do things that are incredibly damaging and that have lifelong consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you
Yes.
don't want as a parent, the last thing you want is for a school to pretend like that's not happening or ignore that. You wanna be partnering with a school, especially a school that, says they're believers and that they're Christians and that everyone's on the same page, with their faith. This is kind of a community task, even though I know people hate to hear that, but I talk about it in my podcast. The Bible is very communal. There are community responsibilities as well as individual and familial responsibilities, and people used to hold each other accountable, families if dad down the street was cheating on mom, there was a quorum of men that would go down there and that would hold him accountable. And
Yeah.
we kind of don't live that way in America. We don't even know our neighbors, but that's not really at all the situation that's being described in the Bible. Like people knew each other and they held each other accountable. And, parents knew like the kid their daughter was gonna marry, they probably had known that kid for a long time, for years and years and years, right? So, like,
Right.
very different scenarios, and I am all about Christian communities supporting each other and being communal again, like, we should have Christian communities, and we should know each other, support each other, be in each other's business a little bit more, I think all of that would be good for us, but
Yeah,
yeah.
you know what it makes me think of? I think of some of my dancers that I've had throughout the years, and it's like between leaving their house in the morning, going to school all day, coming to practice, and then going to a game. They were away from their family the entire day,
Yeah,
every single day. Like, I imagine that they were lucky if they got a meaningful 20 to 30 minutes with their families.
yeah,
And so you have to think about like the people, the adults that your kids are around all day are so formative to who they are. And so, like, all the time, constantly,
yeah,
everyone who's a coach will know this. Like, parents will come up and be like, they listen to you. I've told them this same thing 1,000 times, but then you say it once and they do it.
yeah.
And it's like to have teachers or coaches that are gonna tell them things that you actually want them to learn is like, that can be really valuable, and the gift of mentorship too, like other adults in their lives that can say things to them that you've been trying to say, but it just hits different, you know?
Yes, and
Yeah,
it's so important. I was reading I can't remember if it's a book or who came up with this, but there's this concept floating out there in psychology that you need, like, 5 adults actually in your life in order to have a healthy like, growing up. Like, you need more than just your 2 parents. You need, like, a group of grandparents, and then maybe an aunt and uncle,
right.
maybe a good coach, You need more than just your 2 parents in order to kind of, like, have a psychologically sound understanding of yourself in the world growing up. And so, I think parents especially parents of teenagers do understand the concept you're talking about. You hardly see your kid.
Yeah.
Again, it's why I harp on the Sabbath, everybody, okay?
Yeah.
That's supposed to be your family day. You need to raise your children. But you also do. You wanna have those great adults in their lives that you know are speaking good things into them, that you trust, and there's a community around that and around those people for that kid that makes a huge difference in their psychological well-being.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where you think kids are at these days and what you've been seeing. You've been working with them for years and years, even though you haven't been on necessarily the psychology side of it. You've been coaching and working with them for a long time. How are kids doing right now, and what are you seeing?
Yeah. They're not okay. And part of that is just like I don't know. All of us went through our stuff when we were teenagers. Part of it is like the teen experience. So being able to kind of sift out what is just teen like angst and depression versus what's really serious. But what I am seeing, at least with the clientele that I work with, is just complete lack of like direction or purpose or identity. And I say that in the way like Christians have a certain way that we see identity, but I have many non Christian clients, probably
Mm,
most of them. And it's just like, grasping for straws at like,
mm,
who am I? And part of that's really part of their developmental stage. The the essence of adolescence is this identity discovery. Like you're differentiating from your parents because you're not a baby anymore. You're kind of moving into adulthood. It's very, very healthy to do. And on that journey, you're going, okay, who am I? What do I care about? What do I value? What do I believe? Like what's my vibe or what's my brand is like how they're thinking about it. And so a lot of it is like testing out new things, pushing boundaries, doing stupid crap that they'll look back on as adults and be like, "Wow, probably shouldn't have survived that."
right.
Like a lot of that comes with the territory. What I think is deeper is just not even having a sense of self whatsoever, like completely using culture or their friends or their grades to determine like their absolute worth.
Mm,
Just the core of who they are is informed by all these external things and it leaves them really helpless and hopeless. So I would say that. And then just lack of direction, lack of leadership. They're navigating a lot of adult topics and terrain with like little to no guidance.
right.
And so they're a wreck. It's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that, the media and social media and all of that is adding to the confusion? So instead of, like, it being okay that they're swimming in a soup of, "I don't know who I am,"
Hmm.
um, with the way that I see media and media portraying just human beings and social media, um, I feel like it's not okay to be in that headspace, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you're not it's not allowed. Like, you have to be something and you have to be special,
Right.
and if you don't have that specialness, right, then you're not great, you're not good, you're not
Right.
okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like these 2 polar opposite paradigms. Like, I'm either extraordinary and I'm amazing at everything, or there's something that makes me incredibly unique or different, or I'm nothing.
Mm,
And so it's hard to find the middle ground.
mhm,
I would say they also sometimes think that it's, like, selfish or bad to have any sense of confidence or, like,
mm,
solid mental health. There's a lot of bonding around, like, the unhealth that they all have, and
mm.
so that's where I would say those, like, healthy mentors or adults or other friends who are a little bit more stable is really important because they spend most of their time around their other unhealthy friends.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
explain that a little bit more. So, like, you're a parent of a teen and, um they're kind of involved in more of that, I identify in this very mentally, like, an unhealthy way that, like and I see that with adults too, by the way, like,
Yes.
that, that lack of confidence or whatever is almost like drives their ego. Like it's a
Yeah.
strange so explain that a little bit more.
So let me use an example that I f every woman listening will understand. So you take 8th grade girls, let's say, who are all in the bathroom, and one of them says, "Oh my gosh, I feel so fat today." And then the other one goes, "Yeah, ew, look." And the other one is like, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't even eat anymore today." And it just kind of escalates, and they don't even notice that they're doing it because it's
Mm,
just part of their dialogue. And then in there comes a sideways joke about like, "Yeah, I just should kill myself." Right? And then you
mm,
have another girl who might be sitting there going, "Okay, I actually think I feel okay about my body, but should I? Like, if those girls think that they're fat, then I must be fat." And
mm.
like, it just kind of that's an example of how it just kind of
Yeah,
like gets on you, you know?
yeah,
And I talk to these girls about it, like asking them, you know how this happens. Everyone jokes about like their body or jokes about how ugly their hair is or jokes about um anything, their grades, and nobody is walking around being like, "Okay, I didn't do great on that today, but I'm gonna do better next time."
right,
You
right,
know? Or and a lot of times they dive in to help each other, so if one of them is self-harming, then the other ones are like, "Okay, how can I save you?" And
mm.
then that takes a toll on their mental health, so it's just really sticky, and knowing that that's just part of where they are in life can allow some of the parents to, like, take a deep breath, breathe in and out, and know, like, this isn't anything totally wild. It's just really complex to navigate, and that's why they need healthy adults and parents to debrief with and process with, because
But
their friends are not.
healthy adults and parents, like okay, I started doing this Substack around, a book that I wrote with all of these issues that I thought Christianity was kind of missing the boat with.
Yes.
And concept-wise, I think one of them has been the concept that God thinks you're horrible
Yeah,
and that you are awful, and that because you're sinful, everything about your body is awful, and there's this dualistic view of the human being that sneaks into Christianity where, like, your spirit could be perfect, but your body, like, is materialistic and it's made for, burning up or whatever.
yeah,
There are these weird philosophies that sneak into Christianity, right? And it's not what I read in scripture at all when even after the fall, God says to Adam, you're still going to walk upright. You still have dignity. You're still made to be like me. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to rescue you so that you can be the ideal I made you for. And David says, I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. All these really positive views of the human being. But I think even Christian adults, they don't have a positive view of themselves. So, like, how can you become that positive parent or that positive adult for your teenager? Like, what are some tips and tricks to maybe not say or do say or like check yourself like when you because as parents, like I have a teenager. There are things he does that remind me of me and it triggers me a little bit and then I have to like have a conversation with myself, and, like, take a step back and, like, "I can't believe he just said that," and so what are we supposed to do as kind of unhealthy adults? Honestly, we have the same issues with social media, just maybe on a smaller scale. We have a lot of the same self-confidence issues, and then we have theology issues that we're dealing with in the Christian community. What do we do with all of that? How do we become better parents?
okay, we run a 10 session course on this one question. So there's a lot. A lot of it comes down to exactly what you said, like your teenager just knows or doesn't know, but they do it anyway. Those kind of like tender points in their
Mm,
parent where they're gonna step on it or pick at it, and then it like activates something in you and you turn into someone you don't know or you thought you left behind.
right.
And that's where a lot of conflict comes from. So, in some of our courses, we talk about how it is like one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your kid is to do your own work
Mhm.
around healing past traumas, or like if you notice that there's just a theme that keeps coming up, you keep having the same fight with your kid, or you're just mad at them about something, or you notice that you're 24/7 lecturing them or whatnot, doing exactly what you said, like pausing and going, okay, wait, what is going on in me? And working to resolve that, because it's almost like the analogy, like when you're on an airplane and they say that the adult has to put their oxygen mask on first and
Yeah.
then help the child next to them. It's kind of that idea in the sense that when parents are so depleted and they've just been going, going, going for who knows how many years, and every parent, like I tell my teenagers, parents are people too. Everybody
Mhm.
comes into this relationship with history, with stuff, with wounds, with all of that. And if you can kind of differentiate, like, where you end and they begin
Yeah.
and all of that, that is actually, like, the best thing that you can do. Now, some parents hesitate to do that because it feels selfish, or it feels like, "Am I admitting that I'm not perfect, or am I gonna be showing weakness?" And I it could be viewed that way, I guess. It could also be an opportunity to model what it looks like to, like, search for health and wholeness in your own
Mm.
life, and to say, "Okay, I'm noticing these unhealthy patterns, or I'm noticing that something isn't going great in our relationship. I'm gonna go see if I can figure out what that is." You
Yeah.
know? Like, on my end, I'm gonna see if I can figure that out. So,
I find it, I feel like with my oldest, I had to let go of him a lot earlier, just life
yeah,
circumstances. Um, but I found it a little bit of a relief actually to just remind myself during those times he's his own person and
yeah,
he's leading his own life. And was God gave him to me to help him become who he is supposed to be, and he's not going to be me. That's
right,
kind of a relief, actually. It's like he makes his own choices, and I'm supposed to be there to help him navigate, right?
yeah,
Like the good and the bad of those choices and work through them and work through his feelings and it's his life. It's he is his own person. That's always a relief to me. So I'm always surprised when parents don't find that kind of relief because it's like
right,
I make enough of my own mistakes. If I like am overly connected to my kid and he's also making mistakes, that's going to drive me crazy. Like I'm going to be like,
ah,
yeah, it's gonna be too much, it's overwhelming, it's his life, so I'm here to help him. I love that Bible verse, like, "Train up a child in the way they should
yeah,
go," right? The
yeah,
way they should go. Now we like, yes, with morals and with godliness, all that, yes, we have similarities there, but your kid is gonna be different than you, and then sometimes similar. Like, those things that are similar are actually the things that usually drive you nuts, right?
right,
But they're still them. That doesn't mean that
yeah,
they're you. That's just a genetic thing. I think they're kind of finding that, aren't they? Like, you carry a little bit of, like, cellular memory from your family lineage, and so there is this tendency to have those similarities that can drive parents nuts, but it's still they still have to lead their own lives. It's not your life.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you know what else I've been seeing contributes to some tension is, like, parents have an idea of what they want their kid to be and who they want their kid to be, and parents take the responsibility of parenting seriously.
Mm.
So they're like, it's my job to parent this child in a way where they will become a functional adult and where they will make good choices, know the Lord, etc.
Yeah.
And that responsibility just it becomes ultimate, and then it gets held really, really tight to the
Mm.
point where it ends up pushing a kid away. And so kind of just remembering, like, you want the number one key to being successful in everything I just mentioned is having an open relationship and a trusted relationship where they can come to you with, like, their most shameful, embarrassing thing and know, okay, my mom is going to be able to stay sane in this moment and not panic and not, like, reject me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kids who go to the internet or go to their friends or go to adults that you don't want them going to because they can't talk to their parent.
Mm.
And so it's like, yes, you have this responsibility and it's a good responsibility,
Yeah.
but doing it in a way where it's like, I don't know, where it's not held so tight that you end up like whipping your kid with it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
because they can't ever live I find that those sorts of expectations to no one's ever gonna live up to those sorts of
right.
expectations, and I think expectations just in general can be really dangerous.
It's tough.
It's not a great idea to have really, I guess, specific expectations of anybody, let alone your kids, in that regard. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you can answer this, but let's
Uh-oh.
say there's a parent out there who
Yeah,
is dealing with a teen that is self-harming in some way or, in one of those places. Probably different you probably have a different answer just depending on what the actual issue is. But is there something that you definitely should not say to them? Like, you come to this information, you come to this knowledge. Do you see parents, like, make the same type of mistake or mistakes? What are those? Like, what should we be avoiding?
that's a great question. It's not so much like don't say this one thing. It's like, okay, the behavior, whether it's self-harming or you find that they have become addicted to something, whether it's porn or alcohol or vaping, or you find that they have an eating disorder. That is the, like, top tier behavior that's happening. There is a whole world of emotion underneath that. Generally, you don't just start self-harming just because. There's a reason. And I think one mistake that parents do make is when they find these really hard things out, they come in immediately with the disciplinary action or the punishment or the, like, "That's so irresponsible. How could you do that?"
Mm,
And in some ways, it's like, yeah, it's not great to cut yourself, and we know that logically as adults. For kids, it's like understanding there's so much hurt behind this behavior, and if you can approach them with the posture of the parent that might say, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea that you were hurting so bad." Like,
mm,
attend to the wound rather than the behavior, if
mhm,
that makes sense,
mhm.
and be willing to, like, listen to what's going on, and you might think half of what they say is so incorrect, right? Or it's like they've misunderstood so many things, but giving them the chance to speak. And I think as parents, one thing that parents might do is think that certain things are understood that are not. So, for example, it's like, of course, my kid knows that I love them. Of course, they do. Of course, my kid knows that I'm not disappointed in them if they get a C or a D on a test. Of course, my kid knows that they're still lovable if XYZ. And you know that because you are a rational adult and you are very familiar with your feelings towards your child.
Mhm.
I would say the teenagers are in a place where they are constantly trying to measure up, they're questioning their worth, they're like little tiny things can put a depressed or anxious child into a spiral of wondering like, am I embarrassing? Am I unlovable? Am I
Mm,
unworthy? And so things that might be totally, I don't know, kind of like mild, or you might blow it off as a parent. You never know what of those things gets like lodged in your kid's soul.
yeah.
So, a really helpful thing that parents can do is always say your feeling or your intention out loud. So, telling them, "I love you so much," like a million times. You can't ever say that enough. Or, "Hey, really want you to study for this test and I expect you to do well, but if you don't, I'll never change how I feel about you. I'm still so proud of you. We can work through this."
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Like, "I'm really disappointed that you were caught vaping. This changes nothing about how much I love you. You are so worthy to me. How can we address this? What's really going on?" and talking to your child like they're a human person,
Yeah.
right? Teenagers can have very adult conversations, and they're so hungry for it because I mean, Rachel, think about it. They're navigating addiction, pornography, sexual content, um, incredibly like just unbelievable stuff. All the things that adults get confused about. And then they have a parent who is just unwilling to talk about it or is going
Mm,
to just yell at them if they bring it up. It's like, where are they supposed to go? Who are they supposed
right,
to talk to?
right. And they again, because we don't have a very good communal setup, we kind of leave kids to each other to
Yes,
try to fix these things, which is a disaster because none of them are old enough or wise enough to be able to help each other navigate through those things, and they're not equipped, you know? You have to understand who's equipped and who isn't. Other teenagers are not equipped to handle those issues for another teenager, and
right.
so in fact, I feel like a lot of times they just get pulled into it,
Yeah.
in a really unhealthy way. I wonder, with well, ho I better stay on task a little bit here. I gotta say. So, basically, your answer to my original question is the kids aren't doing very well. There's a lot of factors at play. Um, I've been talking a lot on my podcast about physical health as well, and just kind of um, I don't know if you have been listening to any of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s
Mhm.
interviews lately, but he calls it like the soup of chemicals that our kids are now growing up in as well, can cause a lot of damage. I wonder, do you see like a certain set, like a top 3 of issues that happen to people, that happen to young people that cause them to get into these self-harming activities? Or is it really all over the map?
It's kind of all over the map.
Okay.
Um, just because, I mean, everybody has such a different family environment. It might
Mm,
be a trauma that they experienced, y- you know, younger in life. It could be a fallout with friends. Sometimes, as, with teenagers, it's something so minuscule or seems minuscule. You know, when you ask, like, why did you start cutting? It's like, well, I don't know. I
mm,
don't know. I, like, got a bad grade on a test. So it's so all over the map, at
mm,
least with how people deal with things. Perfectionism is a huge piece of it, and, like, just having to be amazing all the time, and then just being on their phones is rough. Um, a lot of them don't have healthy diets, aren't getting enough sleep. Like, sleep is so wildly important for young people. They need it. And if they're up on their phone till 2 in the morning on Snapchat, then they're not getting it. And they just have all the like light in their eyes at all
yeah.
times. They're waking up in the morning, driving through Starbucks, getting like a venti coffee and then drinking an energy drink. Like it just is a lot.
Right, and there is I think parents don't understand this. There is a physical, like, biological aspect to some, anxiety, right? Like, if your kid is, let's say, drinking a bunch of energy drinks and their heart rate increases, right? That heart rate increase will cause a change in the chemical all the chemical balances going on in your body. Adults have this issue too. If your heart rate has increased, your anxiety goes up. It's just a
Yes.
physical, like biological reaction. It's natural. Your body responds, and your mental state is connected to your physical state. And again, it's something Christianity has done this dualist thing that has been so bad, thinking that you can separate your physical body from your spiritual and like your soul position. You can't do that. I mean, you should know that, by the way, because you can't escape your body until you die, right? So your soul is connected to your body. There's not like you're not jumping out of your body. But what you do with your body connects to your soul. It affects your soul, and what you put into your body affects your mental state. And parents, you need to pay attention to this.
Yeah.
This is
Well, and
huge.
teaching your kid to pay attention to their body, like how, what feeling do they get when they feel fearful and where is
Right.
it in their body and what had happened 5 minutes before? I mean, it was probably a week ago when I was in my bathroom getting ready for work, and I was just, like, shaking, literally tremoring, and I'm like, "Am I super nervous about something? Am
Mm.
I freaking out?" And then I go through it and I'm like, "No, my coffee to food ratio is to water ratio
I
is
do that.
so off."
I
Like,
I have coffee right
yeah,
now. I'm not gonna tell anybody what time of the evening it is, but I'm drinking
yeah.
coffee right now. Yeah.
I hadn't eaten food or had any water, and it was, like, my 3rd cup of coffee of the day, and I was just, like, literally physically buzzing, and I'm like, "Okay, that matters." Yeah.
It does. It really matters, like you're saying, sleep, all these things.
Yeah,
We used to eat, like, what I call God foods a lot more. You had to eat whatever the land was giving you, right? And you had to eat whatever the animals were giving you. And now we're eating a lot of things that are covered in chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. Parents, again, do not understand this. Endocrine disruptors are going to cause your body to produce hormones in wrong balances, right? And suddenly people don't feel like themselves. They don't feel like they're a girl anymore. They don't feel like they're happy anymore. They don't feel like, and disease and all of these things. I know people don't want to believe it, but some of this actually is like biological, environmental. You can fix so many things with good exercise, good sleep, and good food. You can
right.
fix it. I mean, when did they discover that yogurt helped with depression? Was this like 5 to 10 years ago?
I don't know.
I mean, they're starting to discover, like, my grandma always used to say this, the "you are what you eat" idea, and the uh your health is in your gut. This was like an old grandma thing, I felt like from, like, the 1940s,
Yeah.
and then the medical community shunned that whole concept for a long time. They're like, "That's ridiculous." And then in 2018, they discovered that your immune system absolutely is connected to your brain, and they didn't used to think that. They used to think they were 2 totally separate systems. And that just one discovery, right? It changes everything. Like if your immune system is unhealthy, your mental state is going to be less healthy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's
That's a bunny
actually
trail.
a book that I would suggest for this topic. Um, I have to look it up really quick. I think it's called, but it's about depression and inflammation
Mm.
and all of the stuff that they're discovering. It's called The Inflamed Mind
Oh.
by Edward Bullmore, and it talks about all these, our microbiome and how important it is and how it contributes to depression. And
Mm.
I think there's, who knows what that will look like in 20, 30 years with what we've discovered just by paying attention to it. But yes,
Yes.
there's a huge component to
Yeah.
all of that.
There is, and I feel like with young people, their bodies are so quick. As I get older, my body is so slow to respond to anything. It takes forever. But like when you're young,
Right.
your body is so quick to respond. So I've noticed, making those changes with my son, letting him sleep more, which is not natural for me. I'm like, we've got
Let's
to be
go.
worker bees. Yeah. But letting him sleep more actually has been super helpful for him. All of those things that maybe aren't even natural for you as a parent, but it's like, no, we're gonna have at least like one healthy meal a day. We're gonna get this many vegetables. You need exercise. You can't let your kid just watch, TV and play video games all day. All those things make a
Yeah.
difference. Okay. I have like a couple more questions I've got to get to with you, even though I know we're short on time. Um, I'm looking at the most important couple things. I'd kinda like to know what you think or how you think the church is doing on engaging with some of these issues, especially with teenagers.
Yeah. I can only speak to kind of how I see it in my office
Mhm.
because I'm not, in a youth ministry and I'm not seeing it directly. So they could be doing great, but I do wonder if there's disconnects in terms of how comfortable the church is really going there with kids and meeting them exactly where they're at. I know that there's churches that do an amazing job at this. My husband and I have had the opportunity to go into churches and talk about social media and talk about sex trafficking or talk about porn. And those are the churches that are like, we just want to talk about it.
Yeah.
but it's hard to talk about. I would say young kids or adolescent age, it's very natural for them to go through some sort of crisis of faith. Again, just because they're trying to ask, like, what's true about me? What's true about the world? And they're being bombarded with so many things culturally that would tell them, that it's just ridiculous to be a Christian, not
Mm,
only theologically, but it makes you a bad person.
mm,
And so I think that that is really where the church or anyone involved in ministry with young kids can be helpful in trying to teach them some sort of like really, really gritty, tangible, solid, like apologetic space worldview where it's not just going to get swept away
mm,
is important because they just don't know. They've
mm.
grasped the God exists and I'm supposed to be good and he loves me. But if I'm not perfect, then does he love me? And I don't know if I believe that. That's kind of
Mm.
where it is with teenagers. So I I just encourage parents and ministry leaders to like if the Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. If that's like the top level, go all the way to the root and
Yeah,
get to like, okay, if porn is evasive in teen culture, why?
yeah,
And what like, how can God address that topic?
right.
Like, that one. Or is
Mhm,
it just void of any sort of spiritual explanation or solution? You know what I mean?
mhm.
So there's a chasm
Yes,
probably with that, at
and I
least with
think
my clients.
I love your answer there because I think that, I was just listening to do you know who N.T. Wright is?
I know the name, but not super familiar with the work.
He had a really short interview, it was, like, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but in it, he talked about um how if all you believe Jesus did on the cross was died to save you from going to hell, then you are missing a huge, huge, huge theological understanding, and that we've got to stop just feeding people the basics. And there's so much more depth and there's so much more understanding, and it is psychologically sound, and it is something you can see in the environment. It's environmentally sound, and it's sound across the board, and there's so much depth, and if you could teach your kids that level of truth, then when they walk around in the world, they can see it and they can understand it, they can make those applications, they can no matter what situation they walk into, they have that foundation. The church doesn't seem to be educating at that level
Right,
most of the time. We are educating on such a they call them seeker-friendly churches for a reason, it's fine, right? Seeker-friendly, like the brand new baby, but baby Christianity, Paul talks about this, you can't stay there. If you stay in just those very, very, very basic principles, when the world hits you with a lot of their theology and a lot of their logic, you can get swept away. You don't have a deep enough root. And, that's the seed, right? The parable talks about, Jesus talks about seeds that get scattered in soil where they can't take root, where something comes along and chokes it out. Materialism comes and chokes it out, or something comes along and steals it. Other theology, other doctrines can steal that seed away. And because we're not even equipping parents to understand the Bible at that level, how could they possibly teach their children? And then you go to church and you're not learning at that level. And so nobody's ever really learning at that level. But there are communities that are doing a better job than others. I would say I feel like it's more orthodox communities, unfortunately, and fortunately, they exist for us to kind of see, but, like, Orthodox Jewish communities don't see kind of the falling away of their children as much.
right.
But it's because they do that principle that Deuteronomy states, which is you're supposed to talk to your children. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, mind, and strength." You're supposed to talk to your children about the Lord in the morning when you wake up, and as you go throughout your workday, and in the evening when you go to bed, and you're supposed to constantly be educating them about the Lord.
Yeah.
That's really not what we're doing.
No.
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 So,
And think about
yeah,
what it requires to do that now in our culture. Like, it used to be enough, not that the gospel is not enough,
right.
but it used to be enough to say, "Jesus loves you." And right now it's like, how are you gonna send your 18-year-old, 17-year-old kid off to college where they are going to know people of differing, like, gender identities, and they're going to know people in different political parties, and they're gonna be asked, like, "How dare you become a Christian? Like, why would you ever do that?" And that is the moment that they can either stand there and give an answer, or they're like, "Never mind, I'm not, it's forget it."
Yeah. Exactly. That's
So,
exactly the case. If you don't know why you believe what you believe, you will lose your belief. The why is everything. And I just don't think churches and families are able to teach the why right now. And it's unfortunate, but we need to become, as parents, we need to learn the why better so we can teach our children better, because that's the only hope. Like, what else are you gonna do? Your kids are gonna go out into the world. You're gonna have to let them go. You're gonna have to watch them walk away. But at least when they come home with those questions or when they come home with those battles, you have done the work to be ready with a good answer, as the Bible says we are supposed to have. You're supposed to have a good answer for every question. And the Bible actually provides that if you're willing to do the research and the work. And by the way, if you love the Lord, the Bible should be eternally interesting to you, and you should want to do the work and do the research, and if you don't, then you have your own spiritual crisis you're dealing with, right? Like, and I've been there before. Sometimes, in my life, I can say honestly, I would sit and read the Bible and I couldn't even read it, right? I couldn't even, like, I'd get through a paragraph and I'd have to reread it over and over and over just to even try to take in what it was saying. But when I really went to the Lord and I said, "I want you to actually show me who you are," he opened up those doors and he turned on the light bulbs, and now it is that living water that Christ talks about. It's just constantly living and flowing, and it's amazing, and I wish I could do this like 100% of my day. If I could just sit and talk about the Bible with people 100% of my day, that's like my life goal. That's all I wanna do. I don't know, I feel like a cartoon character or something. There's some episode of something where it's like, I figured out how to make money while I'm working. If I could figure out how to make
yeah.
money, doing that all the time, I would. But, okay, I've got one more question. So, what would you do if you were running, like, a youth program at a church? Maybe give like 2 or 3 pieces of advice you would give to those youth directors on how to help the church engage and help those parents engage in, more psychologically sound teaching and instruction for these kids and for these parents.
Yeah. Some of the stuff that I mean, these are, like, ideas, but I do them in groups as well that I run, is, like, name the things that they're struggling with. So, like, put it up on a board or whatnot and say, like, "Okay, what's going on in your youth culture right now?" Like, put it all out there, and then go through those and actually see if you can study them together
Mm,
or find the answer. Have them do some of the work. Like, what's the argument for this thing? What's the argument against this thing? Like, teach them to be thinkers, teach them to be researchers, looking at both sides, but, like, along with that, like, wanting to know truth, and that truth is good. And so I would, if I were running a youth ministry church-based, I would just go straight for it, honestly, and talk about the stuff that's happening, and I would involve the families in that. Like,
mm.
I would think it would be really important kind of side by side to meet with parents and say, "Okay, how can you as parents navigate um, teen culture, which is saturated with comparison and perfectionism, and how can we talk about these things?" Like, that's what I would do, and that's a lot of what my ministry is anyway, but just with a counseling
And
side of things.
would you say there's like age appropriateness to each of some of these issues? Like, I'm wondering,
Yeah,
when I was a teenager, cutting wasn't a thing.
yeah,
I never heard about that. And I'm kind of glad, because that
yeah,
idea being implanted into the system I was already in would have been a nightmare. So,
yeah.
like, at what age do you think most teenagers are aware of most of these issues?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. There's obviously age appropriate stuff. Um, I think the age is probably a little younger than you would assume, So, like, the average age of exposure to pornography is between 8 and 11 years old. That doesn't
It's
mean that
terrible.
you need to talk about porn to 8-year-olds,
Right.
right? And self-harming behavior is really kind of becomes common, like, later elementary school, early middle school.
Wow.
And so it's younger than we want for sure. And it depends on how you're talking about it too. Like maybe for a younger age group, like middle schoolers, you talk about like what does it mean to actually love and care for your body? What is the
Mm.
role of your body? And by the time you get to high school, they've
They
seen it
know.
all.
Yeah.
They know. They
Yeah.
know, and so it's good to just talk about it and partner with parents and how you talk about it. But that's probably what I would do, and
Mhm.
do it in a way like these kids right now value justice, but they need to know what true justice is, and they value kindness, and justice and kindness are very good things.
Yes.
So, equipping them with the tools to be kind and be truthful, because it almost seems like that's where they feel like they have to choose one. They have
Mm.
to go with the truth means that you're like a bigoted jerk, but to be kind means you have to leave your faith behind.
Right.
So, how do you integrate them and do them well is something that I would love to see taught to our young people and our adult people.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, I have one. I know, we're way over. I have one
we're
more
fine.
question. I have one more
Mhm.
question. Um, so I'm not sure the law now with, uh, therapy, but I'm hearing, mixed messages about therapists not legally being allowed if, like, a kid decides they want to be transgendered or whatever, a therapist is not legally allowed to practice therapy in a way that would restore them back to their original biological gender identity. Is this true? Um, and how would you help parents who maybe have a kid that's actually really suffering find a good therapist, someone who's actually gonna help their kid heal, not push them into a
Yeah,
social.
yeah. I would say it's mostly true
Okay.
in the sense that different states have different laws or they word it different, and so there would be, different ways to approach it. Therapists in general are very afraid of this topic
Mm,
because it's one that could cost you your license if you navigate it incorrectly or in a
right,
way that people don't like.
right.
Um, I have clients who are struggling with this and, the wanting gender transition or wanting hormones or wondering about their gender identity or their sexuality. And it's actually like a really tender place to go with them because it's, again, like we talked about with the self harm and the eating disorders, there's so much else going on.
Right,
And that's where I would hope all therapists have a willingness to go beyond the gender question and
right.
go into like, okay, who are you and what is going on with you as a person? Because they're a whole person. All of us are more than our body parts. With parents, I would say you should ask your therapist, ask them like how they would handle that and maybe like what their thoughts are.
Yeah,
And I don't know how they'll answer because they can't just flat out tell your kids, "Sorry, no. Um, this is what we're doing, we're not doing this."
yeah.
So you're gonna wanna find a therapist that's actually interested in getting the whole view
Yeah,
of
because
your
my
kid.
question is, what if that's a child that has been sexually abused and you are not allowed to explore that an issue maybe has happened there that has messed with how they feel. There might be something really egregious that has taken place, and a parent would want that to come out in
Yeah,
therapy. They would want that to be discovered. But if a therapist isn't on board, like you said, with finding out the whole story and the whole picture, then that kid's never going to get that particular issue actually dealt with.
they'll never get the actual help they need, and I don't know that it's so much like they're not allowed to go into the bigger picture, it's that they're not allowed to like have the goal of therapy be to make that person identify with, the gender that the therapist wants. The therapist is not allowed to take their values and say, here's what I think we should do. It's like an ethical thing.
Right?
Um, but I think, this is my personal opinion, that a therapist who sees a presenting problem is naturally going, like a good one, is naturally going to be curious about how we got here.
Mhm.
And so if if you find that you talk to a therapist who isn't concerned about the whole story, and that would be with any issue, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Then
saying. Why
yeah,
why would we separate this particular issue from all the rest of them and treat it differently when with any of these other issues, you know that there's an underlying problem and what you're seeing is the symptoms of it.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I have thoughts on that, but that might I don't know, that might be a different episode. It's controversial. It's hard. Yeah,
It is controversial, and I'm sorry, I
it's
don't
okay.
mean to put you in a bad position to ask that, but I think for parents have real concerns about even, how do you find a good therapist for your kid? How
Mhm.
do you find somebody that isn't gonna lead them into a more destructive behavior, a more destructive life? I hear bad reports about therapists all the time, and I have my own bad
Yeah,
reports about therapists. I have, in the past with my first marriage, we had therapists that were not good and that did not pick up on things and that were not able to explore things in a way that was necessary in order for anything to get worked on and fixed. And
right.
by the time I found a good therapist, that marriage was over. I did find a good therapist and she changed my life. Like going to her was life changing for me, but it wasn't the first person I went to. And it
Yeah,
wasn't, it took time to find somebody. And parents don't want to spend thousands of dollars on someone that's going to just not be helpful.
yeah,
So I feel like it's harder to find a great person than, you think it is. You can't just call up whoever that you found, in the yellow pages and
right.
yeah,
You need to interview them,
yeah,
and then if it's I would say after 3 sessions, if you feel like you haven't got to some the meat of why you're there, not that you haven't solved it, because that's not happening in 3 sessions, but, like, you're not married to your therapist. You
yeah,
can find someone else or find someone who feels like a good fit, but after 3 sessions, if you notice, like, "Okay, this is not even headed anywhere," because it takes about 3 sessions to develop some sort of, like, rapport and relationship, you can kind of get the sense of where you might go, and if your ship is not going, then, oh, maybe we'll say 3 to 5 sessions.
okay,
That would be fair. Then just find someone else.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That's good advice. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you go. I could talk to you about this for a really long time, but this was excellent. Now, where can people find you? And so you're in Colorado.
Yes.
And you're going to have availability as well once you have your license, is that correct?
Yes. So I'm
Okay.
wrapping up all of my internship hours right now, and then in the fall, I will be able to start my official practice. And so that will be through Set Your Mind, but people can find me on at girlabove.com. You can see some of the work we've done so far, and then you could reach out at Krista at girlabove.com
And that's for therapy, that's also for
for
schools and
everything.
churches that would wanna bring
Yes.
you in to have these discussions, um, get your advice, get some consultation, all of that stuff. So these are the places
Yes.
they can find you. Okay,
Yep.
great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Krista.
Thanks, Rachel.
It's
This was
been
so fun.
wonderful. It was so fun. All right, we'll have to have you back.
Thank you.
All
Talk to
right,
you soon.
bye.
Bye.